I didn't say a word when they shoved that eviction notice across the table. Instead, I calmly slid over the 1923 water rights deed and watched the color drain from their faces. 35 McMansions had just become lakefront property. The Willowbrook Estates HOA thought they could snatch my grandfather's farm while I was deployed in Afghanistan. They built their picture-perfect suburban paradise on stolen ground, patrolled by tennis-outfitted Karens in golf carts. What they didn't know was that I'm an Army Corps engineer, and that little earth dam on my land had been waiting 45 years for someone foolish enough to build downstream. Their arrogance was almost impressive, until the spillway gates opened and their luxury community got its first taste of natural flooding. This was going to be satisfying. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below, because you're about to witness the most beautiful HOA takedown ever, powered by federal water law and gravity. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm 34, an Army Corps of Engineers vet, and the third-generation owner of 47 acres of prime Texas land just outside Austin. My grandfather, Pops, to everyone, bought this property in 1955, back when Austin was still a sleepy college town, and barbecue joints outnumbered tech companies 1,000 to 1. Pops was a man who believed in caring for both land and people. In 1978, he built a modest earth dam, not flashy, just solid engineering, to store rainwater for cattle and provide water downstream during droughts. The Army Corps even helped design it. Pops used to say the back 40 acres would one day be worth something special. For us, it was just beautiful rolling hills where we grazed cattle, and I learned to hunt. Then came my 2 tours in Afghanistan, where I specialized in water management and infrastructure. Building wells in a war zone teaches you how precious clean water is, and how quickly people will fight over it. While I was on my second deployment, Pops passed away. The property went into a trust managed by my well-meaning but overwhelmed sister Sarah, who lives in California and knows as much about Texas land law as I know about surfing. She hired Lonar Land Services to handle taxes and upkeep. The taxes were paid automatically, but Sarah never checked the actual assessments. A huge mistake. Enter our villain, Margaret Maggie Thornwell, age 52, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, drives a white BMW X7 and treats tennis skirts like business suits. She's mastered that particular southern sweetness that can stab you in the back while making it sound like a favor. Married to City Councilman Rick Thornwell, enough said about her influence. She's famous for beautification initiatives, which is HOA speak for running out anyone who doesn't fit her suburban vision. Expensive perfume barely covers the lingering smell of cigarettes and entitlement that follows her like a shadow. I came home in August 2023, ready to finally enjoy Pop's land. Driving down that familiar gravel road past the oak tree where I carved my initials as a boy, I expected pastures and the dam gleaming in the Texas sun. Instead, I found construction crews, concrete trucks, and survey stakes littering my back 40 like an invasion. The crunch of gravel under my boots felt different, tangry. I could taste dust and fury as I marched up to the foreman. "Sorry, buddy," he said without a hint of apology. "We got permits. This is Willowbrook Estates property now." I called the police. Officer Martinez explained, uncomfortably, that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was overseas. Under this old law, if someone improves unused land long enough, they can sometimes claim ownership. It's meant to prevent land from lying idle, but developers and HOA love using it to expand. That's when Maggie rolled up in her golf cart like a suburban warlord, voice dripping honey. "Your family abandoned this land, honey," she cooed. "We're just putting it to good use for the community." What really made my blood boil was discovering her crews had diverted the creek feeding Pop's dam. The water level was falling daily, erasing 45 years of careful management that had supported neighbors through droughts and floods. Maggie's parting words still rang in my ears. "You should have stayed closer to home, soldier boy." I hired the first attorney I could find. Mistake. He quoted $85,000 just to challenge the zoning change. Turns out, while I was serving, Maggie's husband pushed through an emergency zoning modification flipping my land from agricultural to residential faster than you can say conflict of interest. But my Army Corps training paid off. While my overpriced lawyer shuffled papers, I dug through county records like hunting for ID. That's when I struck gold, Pop's original 1978 dam permits. He hadn't just built that dam, he built it with direct Army Corps involvement for flood control and watershed management. That meant federal jurisdiction, something no local HOA could override. The adrenaline hit like electricity. This wasn't just a property dispute, it was a federal case, and then it got even better. While making copies at the courthouse, I stumbled on a 1923 water rights deed. My great-grandfather had purchased senior rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed, older than the city, older than the county's water system, older than every McMansion sitting downstream. They weren't just stealing my land, they were stealing my water. Meanwhile, Maggie played the victim. She called an emergency HOA meeting about the dangerous dam and invited a news crew she'd clearly tipped off. On TV, she stood on her perfect lawn, dabbing at her eyes. We're just concerned about our children's safety. That dam looks ready to burst. The truth, my dam had passed its latest inspection with flying colors. Then came her next-door post, full of vague warnings about aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals. No name given, but in a town that's small, everyone knew. Evening after evening, I stood on my porch watching their crews work double shifts, racing to finish before I could get an injunction. Every night brought new concrete pours. Every night, Pop's dam dropped another inch. That's when I called Tony Riggs, an old Army buddy now working for the EPA Enforcement Division. 20 minutes with Tony taught me more about environmental law than hours with my attorney, Jake. He said, if they're diverting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation, and if your dam has federal jurisdiction, he didn't have to finish. I started documenting everything, trail cameras, time-stamped photos, flow measurements at 3 creek points. Sarah called, begging me to just take a payout, but this wasn't about money. It was about the crunch of boots that didn't belong on my land, the click of Maggie's heels across courthouse marble, the bitter taste of stale coffee as I uncovered the depth of their corruption. And above all, it was about Pop's dam. For 45 years, it had been life for our neighbors. Maggie's crew was about to learn exactly what federal jurisdiction and gravity can do. They were turning it into a decorative pond for McMansions. Here's the thing about water rights in Texas. They're older than oil rights, older than mineral rights, and a whole lot harder to steal, if you know how to fight for them. As I watched yet another concrete truck rumble past my kitchen window, I had a realization. This fight wouldn't be won in a courtroom with overpriced lawyers and endless briefs. It was going to be won with engineering. Maggie escalated her harassment. She created what she called a neighborhood safety patrol, 3 HOA board members in matching polos who parked at my driveway like a suburban checkpoint. They photographed every visitor, wrote down license plates, and filed suspicious activity reports with the sheriff. The rest of their campaign was textbook intimidation. Loud music complaints when I had my radio on during farm work, citations for unsightly structures. Even though my farmhouse had stood since 1962, and bogus environmental hazard reports about my septic system, which had passed inspection just 6 months earlier. Then came the dirtiest move yet. Rick used his city council position to order a wellness check on me through veteran services, painting me as a troubled vet struggling to readjust. The social worker who arrived was kind but thorough, ticking boxes on her clipboard while Maggie sat in her golf cart, watching like an officer overseeing an inspection. That was the opening volley in a coordinated bureaucratic assault. Building inspector, fire marshal, health department, animal control, all showing up on the same day like some kind of regulatory SWAT team. Every single one found minor violations that required expensive fixes. The building inspector, a drinking buddy of Rick's, declared my front porch needed $8,000 in foundation work. I knew this tactic. It's the same squeeze play we used in war zones. Bury someone in bureaucracy until they cave, but two can play that game. While they buried me in paperwork, I made calls of my own. Tony Riggs at the EPA was fascinated to hear that Maggie's HOA had never filed the required wetlands assessment before redirecting Willow Creek. Any development that diverts a natural waterway needs federal environmental clearance, even on private land. Violations start at $50,000 per day. Each morning, the smell of fresh concrete baking in the summer heat reminded me I was running out of time, but my digging was paying off. I found that the entire development sat in an Army Corps classified 100-year floodplain. Insurance companies had refused coverage until the HOA produced a flood mitigation plan. Their plan: permanently divert Willow Creek away from their homes and straight onto my property. Here's your second knowledge nugget. Lying about flood risks to secure coverage is federal mail fraud. The more I researched, the more I learned this wasn't Maggie's first scheme. In Houston, her last HOA had been slapped with a $3 million EPA fine for the exact same creek diversion scam. She skipped town just before the feds closed in, then set up shop here in Austin to find new prey. Meanwhile, Maggie went on the offensive. She spread rumors about my mental health, hired a PI to dig into my military record, and started a petition to have my property condemned as a public nuisance. "We have children in this neighborhood," she told the local paper. "We can't have unstable individuals threatening our safety." But while she played victim, I was building alliances. Through online HOA victim forums, I found her pattern: 6 smaller properties swallowed in the last 3 years. The playbook never changed: pressure, harassment, bureaucratic warfare, and convenient zoning changes that always seemed to benefit Rick's construction company. I partnered with my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, whose once thriving garden had withered since the creek was diverted. I met Miguel Santos, whose family farm had been rezoned out of existence by Rick 2 years ago. These weren't random stories. They were part of a coordinated land grab. The constant vibration of heavy machinery through my farmhouse floors became my daily motivator. Every morning, I watched concrete trucks thunder past my window. Every evening, I documented the theft draining Pop's Dam. I'd installed water flow meters at the dam's outlet and at diversion points, calculating exactly how much water was being stolen: 200 gallons a day, worth $47,000 a year in agricultural rights. The gritty sand between my fingers from creek bed tests told a story lawyers could never match: massive environmental destruction. Then came the certified letter. The city planned to seize my land through eminent domain for public safety. Hearing date: 2 weeks away. Maggie's quote in the paper made her play obvious: sometimes you have to protect the community from itself. That same week, the HOA offered me $180,000 for land assessed at $890,000. The message: take the lowball or lose it all. The local paper ran a smear piece: troubled veteran blocks community progress, with a photo that made my farmhouse look like a meth lab and me like I hadn't slept in weeks. Her masterstroke was a staged photo op: 20 concerned mothers with kids at my property line, shot by a professional photographer so my farmhouse loomed menacingly behind them. The Facebook post went viral under #ProtectOurKids. "Our children deserve safe neighborhoods," she told Channel 7, not whatever issues he brought back from war. She was right about one thing: I did bring something back from war: the ability to spot a steamroll coming, and the skills to stop it. That's when Tony called with the bombshell. The EPA had opened a federal investigation into Willow Creek's diversion, based on my complaint. And here's the kicker: federal environmental crimes follow individuals across jurisdictions. Maggie's past in Houston was about to catch up with her. The HOA construction loans were tied to inflated property values that depended on guaranteed water access. If those rights reverted to me, their rightful owner, the whole development would be underwater, financially and literally. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd stolen my water to make their land valuable. Now that same theft could sink them. Maggie's mask was slipping. She offered $400,000 00 cash 48-hour deadline, no questions asked. I refused. She flew to California to charm my sister Sarah with sob stories about her unstable veteran brother. That blew up in her face. Sarah called me laughing. Some crazy tennis lady just offered to help with my troubled vet brother. I told her if she calls again, I'm reporting her to the FBI. While Maggie burned bridges, I built more allies. I teamed up with environmental lawyer Amanda Cross, who specialized in pro bono water rights cases. We formed a coalition with downstream farmers. Miguel produced documentation proving his family had farmed with creek water since 1887. Mrs. Chen brought photos from the 1940s showing her grandfather's garden, fed by the same creek now filling Maggie's decorative ponds. The local Audubon Society got involved after learning the diversion destroyed critical nesting habitats for protected birds, killing protected wildlife while stealing water. That gets federal attention fast. During one of my late-night recon trips, a habit I never lost from the Army, I discovered something incredible. Pop's Dam wasn't just a simple earthwork. The original 1978 design included an emergency spillway system with hydraulic gates that hadn't been opened since 1982. The hollow echo of water through those underground channels during my midnight tests told me they still worked. They'd been built for exactly this kind of scenario, controlled flooding to restore natural flow. I started calculating exactly how much water it would take to bring Willow Creek back to life. Willow Creek's original channel held 2.8 million gallons. My dam currently stored 3.1 million, recent rains topping it off. The math was perfect, but timing would be everything. Using my drone for aerial reconnaissance, I mapped the new home foundations against the old creek bed. 5 houses sat directly in the historic flood channel. 3 more had basements beneath the seasonal high water mark. Here's the ironic part. The builders had added decorative creek beds of concrete and stones, picturesque but useless for carrying real water. My spillway, by contrast, had been engineered by the Army Corps specifically for flood control. Then Maggie made her biggest blunder. Her crew began setting permanent concrete barriers across the original creek bed. This would cripple my spillway, wipe out the downstream ecosystem, yet hand me the perfect legal pretext for what I was planning. The Weather Service was predicting heavy September rains, a perfect cover for emergency dam maintenance. Standing at the controls at sunset, reading Pop's journal about helping neighbors through droughts, the decision solidified. It was time to open the gates. Digging through courthouse archives for the 3rd time that week, I stumbled on a misfiled gem, the original agricultural flood management covenant from Pop's Dam construction, hidden behind 1979 tax records. Its language was beautifully direct. Dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural water rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission. It was a legal duty, one that overrode any HOA bylaws or city ordinances. Amanda Cross's digging turned up even more. The HOA insurance applications were riddled with lies. No seasonal flood risk, full agency approval for a permanent creek diversion to secure $47 million in coverage. Knowledge nugget #3, insurance fraud in development projects can bring criminal charges, not just civil fines. Lying about environmental risk to insurers, that's federal mail fraud, complete with mandatory prison time. The deeper we went, the dirtier it got. Rick Thornwell's construction company wasn't just the HOA contractor, he was the primary investor. Every home on my stolen land fed his bank account. Worse, he'd never recused himself from a single city council vote that benefited his development. Tony Riggs handed me EPA findings that made my blood boil. The creek diversion had wiped out the entire Guadalupe Base population, a protected species that had thrived here for generations. Texas Parks and Wildlife had documented the kill, but the report conveniently disappeared in Rick's office before it could spark federal charges. This wasn't just land and water theft, it was ecological destruction. Then came Amanda's banking lead. The project's loans were based on fraudulent environmental reports claiming the diversion was temporary and the creek would be restored post construction. If my water rights reverted, the development would violate federal lending laws and banks could demand $12 million in immediate repayment. In Pop's attic, I found his handwritten journals. One 1980 entry broke me, open spillway today. Helped the Santos farm and 3 others get through dry spell. That's what neighbors do. The dam wasn't about our family's profit. It was about serving the community, easing droughts, and managing floods to protect the whole watershed. Maggie hadn't just taken land. She'd stolen 45 years of trust Pop had built, one neighbor at a time. My own engineering review confirmed my suspicion. Maggie's diversion was creating an upstream flooding hazard during heavy rains. The old creek bed had been the watershed's natural flood control, and my spillway was the only safe management system. With the heaviest September rains in 7 years forecast, the legal system's slow grind wasn't an option. Nature would flood anyway, possibly causing serious damage, but if I acted now, I could control the timing and scale, proving the HOA violation of federal environmental law without endangering anyone. As I stood at the controls, Pop's journal in hand, the truth hit like a lightning strike. This wasn't revenge, it was restoration. Maggie's schemes had crushed the local farm economy. Miguel Santos lost his century-old family farm. Mrs. Chen's ancestral garden had withered. 3 more families had been forced to sell generational land to Rick's eminent domain ploys. Federal environmental investigators were coming next month. Perfect timing. If I could demonstrate natural flooding before then, their case would be airtight. The smell of old hydraulic fluid reminded me, this dam was built for exactly this moment, when someone had to defend the creek and the people who depended on it. Storm clouds gathered, time to honor Pop's legacy, time to open the gates, but you don't just open a dam without a plan. This would be a coordinated operation, legal, environmental, and community-backed. First, I built my team. Amanda Cross crafted the legal strike, filing extra federal complaints to draw media attention to the spillway opening. Tony Riggs ensured EPA officials would witness our natural flooding demonstration. Miguel Santos compiled 40 years of downstream damage records, proving the diversion's toll on farming. Mrs. Chen offered her property as our staging ground, bringing unmatched credibility as the community's most respected elder. Amanda's legal move was brilliant, an emergency agricultural water rights restoration motion. The dam's covenant legally required seasonal flooding for downstream farms. We weren't breaking the law, we were enforcing it. Knowledge nugget: agricultural water rights often outrank residential development, especially when historical records predate any housing claims. My technical prep was pure Army Corps discipline, precise spillway release plans, starting 6:00 a.m., ramping over 4 hours, peaking at 10:00. Enough volume to replicate natural flooding, damaging nothing but Maggie's illegal barriers. Safety came first, warning signs 24 hours ahead, direct notice to the volunteer fire department. Amanda alerted environmental journalists from the Austin American, Statesman, and local TV crews. Miguel mobilized witnesses for the agricultural water restoration. The narrative had to be set before Maggie painted me as a dangerous veteran terrorizing the neighborhood. Our intel network bordered on spycraft. Mrs. Chen monitored HOA activity through the gossip grapevine. Never underestimate determined grandmothers. The diner waitress, Miguel's cousin, fed us city council rumors. My army buddy at Fort Hood supplied drone surveillance for airtight documentation. While I rebuilt the spillway with modern hydraulics, Amanda waged financial warfare, alerting insurers to fraud, bringing banking regulators into the loan documents, preparing whistleblower filings over Rick's conflicts of interest. The timing was flawless: heavy rain in 72 hours, a federal inspection in the same week, and the agricultural agent ready to record the benefits. Natural weather, federal oversight, and community support, all converging perfectly. And I knew Maggie's psychology was easy to predict. She always escalated when under pressure, so I planned for every likely move. Emergency HOA meeting, media smear campaign, maybe even a restraining order from her corrupt judge friend. Amanda pre-drafted legal responses to each. Evidence preservation was critical. I compiled extensive photo documentation of the current creek diversion, filmed testimony from impacted farmers and neighbors, and gathered historical photos showing the original creek bed and past seasonal flooding. Amanda secured it all in federal court filings for protection. Safety was non-negotiable. I coordinated with the volunteer fire department, alerted downstream residents, and posted bilingual notices. I even drew up an evacuation plan, more for demonstration than need, to prove we were acting responsibly. Amanda's specialty was economic warfare. She tipped state banking regulators about construction loan irregularities, notified the Texas Attorney General about the insurance fraud, and prepared a civil RICO lawsuit alleging a racketeering pattern. Knowledge nugget: coordinated multi-agency investigations often force faster settlements than single lawsuits. Defendants can't fight on all fronts. The smell of WD-40 and machine oil filled the air as I serviced the dam equipment and tested spillway gates at minimal flow. Everything worked perfectly. Pops had built it to last. I stocked the farmhouse in case Maggie tried a siege. Amanda filed court orders to prevent interference with lawful dam operations. We used encrypted military-grade radios for secure comms. As I completed the final checks, storm clouds gathered. Heavy rains were 48 hours out, federal investigators 36, and Maggie's morning show appearance 24. The alignment was perfect. At dawn, justice and 45 years of stolen water would flow home. Maggie's desperation showed when she hired private security to patrol my perimeter, not just rent a cops, wannabe tacticals from private military gigs, acting like an HOA dispute was a war zone. My trail cams caught them at 2 a.m., trying to sabotage the spillway, one jamming concrete into hydraulic lines while the other kept watch. Thanks to Tony Riggs, the sheriff's department was waiting. Deputy Rodriguez nabbed them mid-crime. One claimed they were protecting infrastructure, but couldn't explain the bag of quick, set concrete. Her media blitz was worse. On Austin's morning show, dressed to impress, she trembled into the camera. Veterans need help, not weapons. He learned to use water as a weapon in Afghanistan and now threatens children's homes. Rick, as city engineer, warned of catastrophic dam failure, conveniently omitting our flawless 45-year safety record. While they sold fear, I documented every trespass, every sabotage. Evidence for criminal conspiracy. Tony revealed federal investigators were already wiretapping Rick's office for corruption. They were more desperate than I'd guessed. Then came the legal strike. Rick scheduled a 6 a.m. restraining order hearing with Judge Henry Walsh, his golf buddy and campaign fund recipient. Amanda filed for recusal, but we knew the game. Failing in court, they'd try to stop us by force. Maggie organized a neighborhood safety patrol to surround my property, 20 residents with chairs, coolers, and protect our kids' signs, ready to livestream environmental terrorism. But Miguel Santos countered with 30 farmers and families for agricultural water restoration. Mrs. Chen brought historic creek photos. Amanda invited the Audubon Society and Sierra Club. 2 narratives: veteran attacks families vs. community defends water rights were about to collide. Sabotage escalated. Security footage showed someone poured concrete into the spillway channel, a dangerous block that could cause real flooding if I opened the gates. That was no prank, it was attempted murder disguised as vandalism. I spent the night jackhammering it out, documenting every chunk. Exhaustion tasted metallic, but fury kept me going. Rick abused city council powers to declare my property an imminent hazard. Ordering the fire chief to secure the dam, Chief Martinez, one of the last honest officials, warned me quietly, "You've got maybe 6 hours, make it count." Then the insurance breakthrough hit. Amanda's reports triggered a state probe, freezing all HOA development insurance. Without coverage, the construction halted instantly. Tony moved the EPA inspection up a day after credible sabotage reports. Agents would arrive at 8 a.m. Perfect timing. If the spillway opened under their watch, it became federal evidence. Maggie's final move was the cruelest, calling Veterans Affairs to claim I'd threatened suicide, hoping to get me held. The VA social worker arrived at 5:30 a.m., just as I prepared to flood a subdivision. Convincing her I was fine while setting up a controlled release wasn't a typical Tuesday. Sarah called from California, voice breaking, "I can't lose my brother too. This isn't what Pops would want." For a moment, I wavered, until I found Pops's last journal entry. "Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek." At 7:02 a.m., with federal agents present and the sun rising, I opened the gates to 25%. The sound wasn't destruction. It was a whisper, water returning home after 18 months. Miguel knelt, cupping it in his hands, tears streaking. "This fed my grandfather's farm for 60 years. Maggie reacted exactly as expected, screaming at agents to arrest the terrorist. Her polished TV persona cracking. EPA agent Sarah Kim replied evenly, "Ma'am, he has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood system." Maggie live-streamed, shrieking about unstable veterans flooding children's homes, but the water stayed in the original bed her development had blocked. Helicopters circled, news crews rolled. Farmers spoke of restored water as Maggie tried to hijack interviews, calling me a trained attacker. A reporter asked, "If the water's in the original creek bed, how is this an attack?" You could hear her narrative collapse. Rick, meanwhile, screamed into Judge Walsh's phone about property values, forgetting Amanda was recording every word from the courthouse steps. "Here's a legal nugget for you. Texas is a one-party consent state, meaning only one person in a call needs to agree to being recorded, and that person can be you." The engineering validation was flawless. EPA agent Kim measured the water flow and confirmed it matched historical seasonal patterns exactly. Tony Riggs documented everything, proving this was how the creek ran naturally before the 2022 diversion. Federal agencies always prioritize restoring natural water flow over development convenience, and now we were proving that principle in real time. Mrs. Chen's garden irrigation system filled for the first time in 18 months. 3 downstream farms reported their stock ponds were finally replenished. The local diner owner arrived with coffee and homemade collages for everyone, smiling as she said, "My daddy farmed here. This is how it should be." Even some of Maggie's die-hard supporters quietly drifted away as they realized no homes were flooding. Turns out righteous outrage is hard to sustain when the so-called disaster is just water flowing exactly where it's supposed to go. The insurance collapse hit full stride when state investigators issued a cease and desist against the construction company. All work on the HOA development stopped pending the fraud probe. Maggie soon discovered her own homeowner's insurance might be voided because of false water access claims. Her financial house of cards was falling faster than a dam made of paper. Still, she wasn't done fighting. In a panic, she called Rick. "Get your trucks down here and block that spillway." Apparently undeterred by his security team's arrest, Rick sent 3 concrete trucks to accidentally spill their loads into the creek bed. Federal agents arrested the drivers on the spot for interfering with a federal environmental investigation, a felony, not a civil infraction. Technically, the operation was everything I had calculated. Water flow stabilized at optimal agricultural and environmental levels, never leaving the natural banks. No flooding of residential areas, just 45 years of proven seasonal patterns restored. My Army Corps engineering had been dead on. The political fallout was immediate. City Councilman Martinez arrived and publicly demanded Rick's resignation. "This corruption has made our city a laughingstock. You're done." Federal investigators widened their probe to include RICO charges for systematic land fraud. "This is the smoking gun we needed," Tony told me later. The sweetest moment came when Maggie realized her $2.3 million investment was worthless without stolen water rights. She screamed across the creek, "You've destroyed everything, 35 families." I answered calmly, loud enough for every camera, "No, ma'am. I restored everything. Your families can buy water rights legally like everyone else." Maggie stormed off, vowing federal lawsuits that would never see daylight. Meanwhile, Miguel's extended family brought home-made tamales and cold beer. Mrs. Chen prepared a traditional Chinese tea ceremony to bless the creek. That's when it hit me this was never about revenge. It was about community, the kind Pops had built, one neighbor at a time, one drought at a time, one act of generosity at a time. The media narrative had flipped. Environmental groups hailed the spillway operation as a model for ecosystem restoration. The original Veteran Floods neighborhood headline had become Community Reclaims Stolen Water. Sometimes the truth flows as naturally as water finding its way home. By 2 p.m., Judge Walsh's courtroom was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Media, farmers, HOA residents, federal agents, all jammed in, with more watching from the windows. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a community reckoning. Maggie arrived flanked by a three-piece suit, Army high-powered Houston lawyers, expert witnesses, enough legal firepower to topple a small government. She'd traded her tennis outfit for a conservative black dress and pearls, playing the role of the concerned leader defending innocent families. I walked in with Amanda, wearing a simple button-down and Pop's old cowboy hat. Sometimes the best armor is being comfortable in your own skin. The gallery looked like a wedding gone wrong. HOA loyalists on the left, clutching "Protect Our Kids" signs, the farming community on the right, weathered hands folded, eyes set with quiet resolve. Maggie's attorney opened with theatrical flair, showing photos of muddy construction sites and claiming $7 million in damage from my spillway operation. They even wheeled in a psychiatrist who had never met me to diagnose combat revenge fantasies, based entirely on news clippings. "Your Honor," the attorney declared, gesturing toward me as though I were a war criminal, "this disturbed veteran is using military engineering knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He's turned water into a weapon of mass destruction." The courtroom buzzed until Amanda rose for our response. She presented the 1978 Agricultural Flood Management Covenant, which legally required seasonal flooding. EPA Agent Kim testified that my operation had restored natural water patterns without causing a single dollar in property damage. Historical photos proved current water levels matched 6 decades of seasonal norms. Here's your final knowledge nugget. Legal water rights documentation will always beat recent development claims, especially when backed by federal environmental agencies. Then Tony Riggs took the stand as EPA enforcement officer. His testimony was devastating. The HOA had violated 3 federal environmental laws, committed systemic insurance fraud, and destroyed protected wildlife habitat. Judge Walsh shifted uncomfortably as each federal crime was laid out in his courtroom. You could see him calculating whether loyalty to Rick was worth the risk of facing obstruction charges himself. The breaking point came when Amanda called Rick to testify under oath. When Amanda played the recording of Rick discussing how to destroy property values, he lost it. "This is a federal setup," he shouted, storming toward the door. "We did nothing wrong." His own voice, captured in crystal clarity, did more to prove the conspiracy than any prosecutor could have hoped. But the real emotional punch came from the community's testimony. Miguel Santos spoke of 3 generations of farming undone by the creek diversion, his voice breaking as he described his grandfather's dreams drying up along with the stolen water. Mrs. Chen showed before and after photos of her garden, once lush, now withered. Her quiet composure said more than any lawyer ever could. Fire Chief Martinez testified that the spillway had been operated with complete professionalism and 0 safety violations. Downstream property owners confirmed their water access was fully restored. Then Maggie took the stand for what would be her swan song. "He came back from war damaged, Your Honor," she said, pointing at me with trembling fingers. "He's taking revenge on innocent families, using psychological warfare against children." She accused me of threatening her safety and called the spillway operation environmental terrorism, meant to crush property values and traumatize residents. When Amanda called me to testify, the room went still. I presented Pop's Journal's 40 years of water-sharing records and explained my Army Corps engineering calculations. Then I looked straight at Judge Walsh. "Your Honor, I didn't flood anybody. I restored a creek that was stolen from my family and my community for 45 years. The mic drop moment came when Amanda unveiled our last piece of evidence, documentation of Maggie's Houston HOA paying $2 $3 million in EPA fines for pulling the exact same creek diversion scam. That's when the federal prosecutor stood and announced a criminal investigation into an interstate water fraud conspiracy. The courtroom erupted. Judge Walsh had no choice. He denied every restraining order request, ruled my spillway operation both legal and beneficial, and ordered the HOA to stop interfering with federal environmental enforcement. His warning to Rick was sharp. This court will not obstruct lawful federal environmental enforcement. As federal agents walked Rick out in handcuffs and banking investigators served fresh warrants, Maggie found herself surrounded by reporters. She refused comment, ducked into her BMW, and sped away, no doubt already pricing out moving trucks. I stepped outside to a wall of cheers from farmers, environmentalists, and townsfolk who had just watched justice flow as naturally as the creek. Amanda announced the federal RICO investigation at an impromptu press conference, while Miguel thanked me on behalf of every affected family. My own statement was short. This was never about revenge. It was about doing right by the land and the people who depend on it. 6 months later, the results spoke for themselves. Rick Thornwell pled guilty to federal conspiracy charges and got 3 years in prison. Maggie faced $7 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy faster than water through an open spillway. The construction company paid $12 million in EPA fines and was banned from federal contracts. The HOA dissolved completely, replaced by a new community association built on environmental stewardship instead of suburban power games. My own property value rebounded to $2 million after the creek's federal environmental designation made it worth more than any subdivision ever could. The $340,000 settlement from the insurance fraud case went to a better cause. I bought Miguel's family farm at a tax auction and handed it back to him, debt-free. Restoration, it turns out, can increase property values far more than development. The changes spread quickly. The restored creek drew ecotourism, kayaking, bird watching, fishing to land once destined for McMansions. Mrs. Chen's garden became a model for sustainable agriculture. Downstream farms posted their best harvests in a decade. The diner became the de facto headquarters for the Willow Creek Restoration Association, where farmers and environmentalists plotted the next defense against corporate water theft. Nature bounced back too. Protected Guadalupe Base populations returned to pre-diversion levels in just 4 months. The Audubon Society logged 12 bird species reclaiming the wetlands. Texas Parks and Wildlife designated the creek a critical wildlife corridor, locking in permanent protections. My spillway operation became a case study in the Army Corps of Engineers training manual. Sometimes the best revenge is just doing your job right. Personally, I found a piece I didn't know I was missing. I renovated Pop's farmhouse using sustainable methods. Sarah moved back from California to help run our growing agritourism business. Amanda and I, well, fighting environmental crime together builds a certain bond. The ripple effects reached far beyond our county. Environmental groups used the Willow Creek model to challenge illegal diversions statewide. Federal agencies cited our case when rewriting water rights enforcement guidelines. I became an unofficial consultant for communities battling HOA overreach. The calls haven't stopped. We launched the Pops Morrison Environmental Scholarship for rural students studying water management. Miguel's daughter, Maria, our first recipient, is now at UT Austin, training to protect Texas watersheds from people like Maggie. The annual Creek Days Festival celebrates restoration and resilience with food, education, and veteran support services. Proceeds fund a legal defense program that's already helped 6 other communities stop corporate water grabs. My favorite site, kids splashing in the creek, where luxury homes were supposed to rise swimming in water that runs free because a community stood together. Every Sunday, I bring Pop's favorite mason jar to his grave, filled with creek water, and tell him, she's singing again, just like you said she would. The Willow Creek Conservation Trust now holds development rights to the entire watershed, ensuring no one will ever steal this water again. And here's the twist: Maggie's Houston HOA became the first domino in a federal RICO prosecution. Inspired by our case, 147 families across 3 states have filed their own restoration lawsuits. From my porch in the evening, I watch the creek flow exactly where it belongs, and remember, some battles are worth everything you've got. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek, but you never do it alone. You do it with your neighbors, your community, and people who believe clean water belongs to everyone, not just those with the best lawyers and the dirtiest politics. If you're facing HOA bullying, environmental destruction, or bureaucratic abuse, don't quit. Document everything, build alliances. The law is on your side when you're protecting land for the future. Drop a comment with your own HOA nightmare. I raid everyone and reply when I can. These fights are easier together. Subscribe for more stories about communities standing up to corruption and winning. And remember, your voice matters, your vote matters, and your creek matters too. Next week, the city that tried to steal my neighbor's solar farm, so she cut power to City Hall during the mayor's wedding reception. A different kind of power, wielded by one engineer who turned out the lights on municipal corruption. Water finds a way, justice finds a way, and when a community fights together, it wins together. Willow Creek flows free, y'all, and always will.